Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction. Oh yeah, with me, Beth Rigby.
Shall we go from the top?
No, let's keep that. That's ridiculous.
Right.
I forgot I had to actually introduce myself. Should we start again? Yeah.
No, let's pick it up from there. Beth Rigby, who's forgotten her own name. She's so tired, and we'll tell you why in a moment. Also, hi from me, I'm Ruth Davidson.
And hi from me, I'm Harriet Harman.
So go on then, Beth.
No, I'm actually in another generic hotel room, and I have to admit I did have a little lie down before I began to pod. I had like a little 20-minute snooze because I am very tired, because I am again on the road with Sir Keir Starmer, and I think at this rate I could actually fire up my own generic hotel room series for Channel 5 or something. Today I am in Chesterfield in a Premier Inn, and I have to say, as the ads say, the bed is very comfortable.
So I'm just thinking of Daily Mail headlines, which is Beth Rigby takes to afternoon bed with Keir Starmer or something like that on the Keir Starmer trail. You could set hairs running with that one, Beth.
Blimey, you just did.
Anyway, I'm glad you've had a disco nap.
I had a little disco nap. I did.
You'll need all your energy. What on earth? We've got a big programme today. Like, there's too much news. There is just, even for somebody like you, Beth, who works in news, it's your bread and butter. Even you must think there is just too much news.
Yeah, there is so much news. And part of the reason I am pretty tired is because Donald Trump announced his tariff plans. It's enormous. It is a bit overwhelming. Everyone's trying to work out all the ramifications of it and digesting what it means. So I think we're going to obviously take you through that in this episode. We'll try not to overwhelm you.
Loads of everybody else here was switching on their TVs. What is he going to say that is going to directly impact us? And in every time zone, all around the world, that is what will have been happening, because this one man was going to be saying something because he is in total control of the country with the world's biggest economy. And whatever he was going to do, he was just going to do, and it would have a huge effect on us. I mean, we're in a very extraordinary situation here.
It sort of reminded me of a disaster movie, because like after, he sat down and they started all the analysis and stuff, there was just all of these lines that came in. President of Finland says X, head of the EU says
exactly.
Y. The president of Indonesia responds with Z. And just like, and it was almost like a menu of just, so if you're on, anything that was a news aggregation site or was like Twitter or something like, or X or whatever we call it now, like that, it was just response from world leader, response from world leader, response from world leader, response. And it's just like, he's just creating the weather wherever he goes, and everybody else is having to respond to him.
So we are going to have to talk about that. The Trump tariff announcement is a massive mega deal with really profound implications, and I'm not overhyping it, because Angelo sometimes says I tend to overhype things. He thinks it's a journalistic tendency, but I'm not overhyping it. It's generally a massive deal. So we're going to talk all about that. And also, we don't need any more drama in our lives, do we, when we've got Donald Trump in the White House? But we do want to talk about adolescence, because it's been such a big talking point in government. I've seen the PM twice this week. I saw him earlier in the week as well, when he was talking about the national living wage. And he and I were talking about it off camera, about kind of watching it with our kids, and he really is engaged in that. So we're going to talk a bit about that.
But before we get to that, we have got some very important business first, because if you didn't hear last week's episode, another reason that Beth Rigby is so tired that she's passing out on her feet is because she is running the London Marathon as in training for it in a few weeks' time. But as it turns out, a lot of you, our dear listeners, are also marathon runners. And some of you even listen to us while you're training. God love you. Let's hear now from Catherine.
Hello, it's Catherine from Hertfordshire here. If Beth wasn't already my hero in many respects, I'll send you a follow-up photo of my fringe and often frequented lipstick. She's also now my running hero. I'm running the Brighton Marathon this Sunday, and I will be adding the most recent Electoral Dysfunction episode to my playlist, currently in the middle of curating said playlist, and I think I'm going to put it on around hour 3. I'm not going for a fast time, so I'll be hoping to, if I cross the finish line within 5 hours, I'm going to be really pleased. So I'm hoping that you can pick me up with some extra laughs this week, ladies, around the 3rd hour. And as I am curating this playlist, I'm realising that it's quite the task, so I'd be interested to hear what Beth's best recommendations for running are. Obviously, it'll be too late for me to know them for the rep marathon because I will be mid-run when I'm listening, but I'm also doing the Hackney Half in May, so I can definitely take any recommendations for that. Thanks, ladies.
So if you're watching us on YouTube and not just listening on where you get your pods, you'll be able to see Catherine's picture there. She is talking about being lipstick. But the big question there is, what do you have on your playlist, Beth? Go on then. I think you're going to be angry, shouty women playlist. No?
But also, she set us quite a challenge there, has Catherine, because in the week that we're talking about adolescence and tariff catastrophe, she wants some extra laughs. What's on your playlist? That's a challenge for you. Extra laughs.
Well, I love firstly that Catherine's going to do the Hackney Half because I've done that 2 or 3. I think I've done it 3 times actually, the Hackney Half, and that is a great half marathon to run. When I do half marathons, I do pretty much listen to music, but with marathon training, it goes on. The runs go on for so long. Well, I'm doing a mix of listening to podcasts. I was finishing off an audiobook, but then what happens is when I then have to pick up my pace, I then listen to music because I need a beat. So my favourite song to run to is Eminem's "Lose Yourself." You
That's
know,
a classic.
when he's doing the rap battle. Do you know it,
Yeah.
Harriet?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I listen to that. It's like you've only got one shot.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Do not miss
What
your
an
chance
anthem.
to blow.
Mm.
These opportunities come once in a lifetime.
Once
you
in
gotta
a
use yourself
lifetime.
and use it.
And
You
that-
won't
exactly.
regret it, own it. You
So-
never let it go. Go.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I'm
right?
going to stop that. Nobody wants
Yeah.
to listen to me try
They
and be
do.
Eminem.
They all want to listen to you being Eminem. So Catherine,
I'm more of a
that
Coolio
is-
Gangster's Paradise girl myself, I have to say.
but I I might put it on my playlist. But I've got so I've been listening to I've been doing that. I've actually been going a bit retro and going back to kind of my like teenage years. So I've been listening to Tori Amos again, Lauryn Hill.
Wow.
Yeah. But I'm putting together a London Marathon playlist currently.
So I've got a really good idea that a mate of mine did when he ran the Edinburgh Marathon. And he got people, instead of sponsoring him, they bought a song for his playlist for a set amount. And you could buy as many songs as you liked. And he would absolutely have to listen to it while he was running. And he has had a particular penchant for German death metal bands like Die Toten Hosen and he really hard stuff like that and like Slipknot and stuff like that. He goes to all this mad stuff. So I bought stuff like Hansen's Mbop and S Club 7's Reach for the Stars for him and things like that while he was running when he would prepare to be doing it to death metal and things like that. So I think other people put on stuff like Charge of the Light Brigade and Ride of the Valkyries and all this random weird stuff that he had to download. However, as much as we're training for that, we've also been training. It feels like 4 months for the Trump tariffs that have come in. Did you see that link there? Can you tell I used to work in radio? Because it's not as if, although it was a shock to the world, it's not as if it was actually a surprise. This has been well flagged by the White House. It was well flagged. It's part of the manifesto that he was elected on. You know, he did brought in tariffs in his first term when he was first president. He's been talking about needing tariffs since the 80s when he was just a businessman, talking about how America needed this because people were cheating the States. But in terms of watching the show, and it was a show, he put on a show for the world on the White House lawn.
Well, it's quite retro in a way because here he was with this chart, this multicoloured chart, but it was ace communications because first of all, it put how much you're squeezing America, and that was 1%. And then the second column was, therefore, how much we are going to charge you in tariffs. And it was very simple and no doubt just cut through to everybody. It was very, unsurpassed communication. But the thing that really struck me about it as well is that this was his big signature was going to go on these tariffs. And that was it. That was the beginning, middle, and end of the process. In just every other country in the world, there's some sort of process around other people in the democracy agreeing it. But the process in the States is that although Congress has got the right to decide on tariffs, they've delegated that to the presidency if there's an emergency. He's then said, this is an emergency on our balance of payments and in our economy, and then taken it upon himself to issue these tariffs. And that is the beginning and the end of the process, both to impose them, but also to change them. And more when I see Trump, it reminds me that it's a system with no checks and balances in it. It is the most awful spectacle of political hegemony, and it affects everybody in the world.
Well, I was going to ask you, Beth, in terms of the spectacle of it all. I mean, I've seen online people saying it looked like the world's worst Eurovision. I've seen people say it looked like the Generation Game. It just needed the lovely Miss Rosemary Fords to be to be bringing on the plastic laminated card thing. What was your sort of, as a professional sort of communicator, what was your view of it all?
Well, I was actually not in work yesterday. I had something else on, and I got kind of called in. I got called in to cover it live, so I sort of went in the evening to cover the Rose Garden moment, and I was in the studio watching it.
This is Liberation Day.
This was Liberation Day. He's going to make America wealthy again. He's going to, exact revenge on those that have treated the US unfairly with these huge trade deficits. And then he sort of, rather comedically almost, kind of bring the chart over, and you're kind of watching it go, the chart? And he kind of brings this chart out, and it was almost quaint because it was just kind of like, it wasn't a big screen with data on it. It was like a chart that your teacher would have brought out in the GCSE geography lesson or your economics lesson at school.
Do you remember those overhead projectors where you wrote in the film? It was like one step up from that, wasn't it?
It was literally, yeah.
But the thing is, don't you think, Beth, that it actually worked?
Yes, I
mean,
did.
it actually worked. Everybody's got the name of the countries,
Yeah.
then how mean they're being to America in one column, and how justified America's going to be by imposing tariffs in the next column. So although it was bizarre, it was absolutely a masterpiece of communication.
But I was sort of frantically messaging people in government as it was all going on, because I knew that as soon as he stopped talking, they go, "Well, Beth, what's the reaction?" So I needed to get the reaction, and I messaged someone. I said, "What are your initial thoughts after he'd announced the 10% tariff?" And they said, "My main thought." I've got the message here. My main thought is that was a horrific version of Eurovision, which actually made me laugh because it was like 0 points, 64 points. It was mad. Well, everyone actually got 10 points. Is that, let me say. But then it's like, the Brucey bonus when you're like stick or twit with the cards. Do you remember that game?
Oh yeah, play your cards right.
Play your cards right.
Higher, lower, lower.
So
Yeah.
I'm watching this going, it's like play your cards right. It's like Eurovision. But you are right, Harriet. And it was a masterpiece in communication that what he's doing is actually, and this is why it's a bit mind-blowing, it's ferociously complicated. The strands that flow out of it are endless. And then Trump is there going, this is really simple. He made it seem like a really simple decision to take with only upside as well.
And he's framed it as reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah.
Here is the tariffs you are unjustly imposing on our good-natured America, and here is our measured response.
I was watching the guys that he'd had in the audience. So he got in a whole bunch of like construction workers and refuse workers and car manufacturers that were all in their hard hats and their bibs and everything, who were like whooping and hollering while all this is going on. And I get how if you're from blue collar America and you've seen factory after factory close in Michigan and all of these kind of industrial heartland places in Pennsylvania and all that sort of stuff, and you suddenly got some guy saying, do you know why? It's because people are importing Japanese cars for cheaper than we can make good old fashioned Fords here or Chryslers or whatever it is, and they've been cheating us, and that's what's meant that the factory in your town is closed down and nobody's got a job anymore. You can see why he's the great white hope for people, or the great orange hope for some people, and all the rest of it. And the only thing I could think about was remembering Reagan, who actually took on this idea of tariffs way back in the 80s as the world was opening up a bit, actually, talking about why tariffs are bad and why free trade is good and why tariffs are superficially quite an attractive idea to block other people from other countries from selling their goods in your country. But that actually they cost jobs because they stop you being innovative and everything in your own country and in your own companies, and that ultimately they're always self-defeating. Not just necessarily that everything costs more for the people that are buying them, but they fundamentally undermine what makes good businesses thrive, which is the ability to adapt and to serve their customer base. And I was just thinking, like, how did we get in 30 odd years from Reagan, who at the time nobody thought was that intellectually genius, turns out, and compared to what's there now, turns out he's an intellectual titan. He's an Einstein of policy in comparison to the arguments that were being put forward in the
But I
Rose
think
Garden this week.
Trump
What?
has recast the political map because for a lot of the time, the Democrats were the protectionists and they
Yeah.
were backed by the unions who supported the
Yeah.
Democrats and wanted the protection for that job against the Republicans who were the free marketeers and the global openness of global open economies. And he's turned that around, and that has divided the unions, some of whom are just can't stomach him for all the other things he's doing, but some of whom actually want that sort of protectionism.
This feeds into, what you were saying, Harriet, about the messaging as well, because it was almost folksy, the simplicity of it,
Yeah.
but it was almost going back to the good old days as well. And if you think about what he's doing, is he's rolling back decades and decades of free trade and becoming more protectionist. And actually, if you think about the actual move that he's made, it's the biggest change in tariffs when it comes to the US in a century. I mean, it is absolutely massive what he's
And
done.
nobody thinks it's going to work out okay, even for the states. But it's got such a strong political argument. I mean, in a smaller way, it was the same as Brexit. All the economic arguments were against Brexit, but the simplicity of the message took people with it.
I mean, I have to say, I think he's going to have to kind of. So, first day story, he absolutely, as you say, unsurpassed political communication, no matter what you think of the content of it. But there is going to be a crunch point when he's going to have to explain to American consumers when they go to Starbucks or whatever
Yeah.
their equivalent of Costa is, that slapping 35% on Indonesia and 25% in India and 50% on Sri Lanka or whatever the numbers are doesn't mean that you can grow coffee beans in Texas. And that actually everything that you're buying is just costing more on American shelves. But that comes on a different day.
Well, look, but before we get a bit more into it, why don't we go back to what he actually announced? He announced a baseline of 10% tariffs for everyone across the world, wherever you are. And the UK fell into that band. So we were one of many, many countries that got off with the lowest level of tariffs. He then set out a rather confusing, questionable set of arithmetic about how he calculated what other countries should pay in tariffs, with, you wouldn't be surprised, China coming in as one of the ones that would be heavily penalised. We know that President Trump has a long time been an adversary of China. And the formula used to calculate the tariffs, and this was released by the US, took the US's trade deficit in goods with each country as a proxy for alleged unfair practices, then divided it by the amount of goods imported into the US from that country, came to a number, and then he said, and because I'm being nice, I'm going to halve my reciprocal tariff. So basically what he's doing is he's effectively penalizing countries that have a trade deficit with the US. He says that, countries have been taking advantage of the US by not buying enough US product. It's killing off US industry. It's taking jobs away from the US. Everyone's importing cheaply into the US. So they're putting, their car factories in Mexico to import it into the US, and that this is going to all change, and he's going to implement these tariffs, and it's going to be great for American people. And there is an argument that in a decade's time, perhaps a load of manufacturing does relocate to the US because of tariffs. But the transition to that, if that does happen, is going to potentially be very inflationary and very damaging for consumers in the US.
I think to explain, we asked one of the big brains at Sky News, Ed Conway. So we've got Ed to tell us in clearer language how we can understand how it's going to affect the UK.
I have to say, I have spent the last, 2.5 decades trying to get people interested in trade. It's kind of maddening. No one has cared about this stuff for years and years and years. And now suddenly it is, thanks to Donald Trump, on the front pages. It is a massive deal. So in one sense, I'm kind of excited about this. In every other sense, I'm slightly, kind of really quite terrified about it, because we've never seen quite such drama in the nature of trade in quite such a long time. And when you have these kind of trade wars, and we are moving into a period of trade war, when you have these periods, it can be really, really damaging for economies around the world. It's geopolitically damaging. These moments often lead to, frankly, trade wars often turn into actual wars. So for all those reasons, it is quite scary. For the UK in particular, I mean, it's actually, if you kind of squint, there's a possibility that it's not quite as bad as for everyone else. I mean, the big picture is, if there are trade barriers going up around the world, that makes everyone worse off. It's kind of that straightforward. You're just putting grit into the wheels of commerce, making it more expensive for everyone to buy stuff. In particular, America will see prices go up quite a lot because they're having to pay more for their imports. For the UK, because it is lower in terms of the tariffs than everyone else, it might mean that we're not quite as badly affected. It might also perversely actually mean that our prices actually go down, maybe in absolute terms, if not in relative terms, because we are seen as a kind of cheaper place to sell all those goods that weren't able to go to America. But it's really hard to make sense of it. Broadly speaking, no one is better off as a result of this. And gosh, it's going to be a roller coaster, and the roller coaster has really only just begun in earnest.
Even Ed there, an absolute genius at this sort of stuff, brilliant at it, saying, look, we still don't really know. There's a big shout out here for what happens to Northern Ireland because of the Brexit deal, in terms of their sort of porous border with the Republic of Ireland, which has now got a 20% tariff, and we've got a 10%. So what does that mean for trade passing through one to the other, arriving someplace, going somewhere else? I mean, it is hellishly complicated, and it's going to take weeks to work out.
And for us, although we were on the baseline of the 10%, there's also a 25% rate across the board for car exports to the US. We're going to have to negotiate to try and get away from this 25% on automotives and 10% across the board to see whether we can get a trade deal, which means that we're not affected by those percentages. And the worry then is, well, obviously we hope we can reach a trade deal to abate those tariffs. But the question is, what is on the table? And one of the things that's being mentioned as a possibility for negotiation, which Trump has long complained about, is the digital services tax. And I really hope that we don't use the digital services tax as a negotiating item, and that we then drop that as the price of getting a deal. And this is for why, is that you've got these big companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, eBay, who have structured them, who work globally and who've structured themselves in such a way that they don't pay corporation tax in the UK to any extent at all. But yet they get a lot of revenue out of the UK. So there was a cross-party discussion for years, and it was decided that because they weren't paying their fair share of corporation tax, that we should have a digital services tax, which made them pay just 2% of their revenue into our treasury. And this was to stop global multinational companies actually not paying their fair share of tax. So I think it was a very important principled approach to taxation. And the idea, when we're short of money into the revenue, that we have to drop revenue whose source is global multinational companies who are making money out of the UK, I think that would be, very heartbreaking. So I hope that we will stick with that tax. Currently, it raises £800 million. Actually, it was a tax which raised 30% more than was anticipated. It's a very good way of raising money. I mean, I'd hope that perhaps we might double it in our difficult times and use that money bespoke for tackling child poverty or something like that. But the idea that it should be whisked away is problematic. But we have got to negotiate to try and get a trade agreement with the States.
On the digital services tax, that is a tax that was a 2% revenue on search engines, social media services, online marketplaces. It's very unpopular with big US tech companies, all of whom are quite close to Donald Trump. You remember all the big bosses were lined up in the front row in front of his cabinet at the inauguration. And I think, from what I've been told, Harriet, is that is absolutely on the chopping board. As something that could be negotiated as part of this economic deal. And when you think about it in the context of what, you were just saying about the jobs in the car industry, like potentially 25,000 jobs, you can see why the Chancellor, in that invidious choice, would let go of her digital services tax, or if not completely get rid of it, at least amend it in order to trade with Trump to get the economic deal. I mean, you must have some sympathy with that.
Well, I think that, they'll be making a calculation, but it will be very heartbreaking, and also feel a bit egregious, is that this was a tax we, in this country, across all parties, we decided we wanted to do this in relation to revenues which came out of people from this country. And we decided we wanted to do our tax in this way. And it looks like because Trump doesn't like the way we do our tax, we're going to have to change it. And it might well be we do have to change it because that's the terms on which he's insisting. But just think for a moment what that means, is that this one man is saying that even though everybody agrees, and even though it's got a very fair basis, that we can't do it anymore. We've lost that autonomy in the quest for a trade deal. So it's, that is bleak. I mean, it's bleak in terms of the money, but it's bleak in terms of the principle as well.
I mean, I have to say that I've been pretty impressed actually by the measured response from Starmer and his government. There have been a lot of governments around the world who have immediately jumped in, immediately announced, reciprocal tariffs, etc. And I actually think it is to his credit that he's pausing and saying, look, we're gonna continue the negotiation that we're doing around other areas about particular agreements. I mean, he'll be in a pretty long queue because everybody in the world now wants to work with all of the people in the Department of Trade in the States to work out exactly what this means and how it goes. But just to pause, but he's going to come under a huge amount of pressure. He's going to come out under a huge amount of pressure internally from internal sectors. So like you say, the car industry, like the digital services industry, Harriet, that you both talked about. In terms of other manufacturers that sell a lot in the States, so in Scotland, the whiskey industry, we don't charge tariffs on American bourbons coming here, for example, but they've now just been whacked with a tariff for sending Scotch and malt over there, and it's a huge market. The States, it's a massive market for whiskey, and everyone thinks it's this cute cottage industry, but it's actually a multi-billion-pound industry. It's a huge product that we sell over there. This is real in terms of the economy, in terms of the jobs. This blows Rachel Reeves' idea of growth out the water, and it was already below 2%. I mean, this is absolutely, if this is the sort of protectionism we haven't seen since the 1930s, and then some, we could have the same sort of financial crash as we had in the 1930s, where the entire world was impoverished because America sneezed. And, I do think that Keir Starmer is going to have to be just incredibly strong and not bow to the external pressures that are on him to be bold early when boldness might not be the right policy here.
It's clear that his visit to America and how he's conducted himself on the world stage, that Keir Starmer has developed a good relationship and respect in Washington for him. Whether that makes any difference or not, it can certainly not make things worse, but whether it makes things any better and helps us, who knows? But it's the cautionary way of going about it. But it does remind me that you could have hardly thought of a closer relationship than between Tony Blair and George Bush. Republican George Bush, Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair, they were incredibly close. And yet George Bush imposed steel tariffs on us. And Tony Blair responded by really openly denouncing them, saying they were unacceptable, unjustified, unfair, wrong, breach World Trade Organization rules. So he was very outspoken despite their close relationship. But I think it makes sense for Keir Starmer to keep with the precautionary approach and resist the Lib Dems urge to just do a lot of, annoyed rhetoric.
The approach has been be pragmatic, no sudden moves, no knee-jerk response, and take it step by step. Today, the question I asked him, because he's in Chesterfield, because he's actually here to do the local election launch. It's local elections next month. He was out on the road to talk about that local election launch. The question that I put to him was, well, we're talking about it now. Like, what's the impact? What does it mean? And we can talk about it in sort of abstract terms, but I think loads of people will be looking at this going, there's loads of tariffs coming. What does it mean? What does it mean for the economy? Are my bills going to go up even more? Is my shopping basket going to cost more? Is there going to be more inflation again? Am I going to keep my job? Is the government going to have to tax me more? Are we going to have to cut public services? I mean, these are real, like, it's the kind of Ruth analogy. Trump sneezes, and we're all sort of knocked flat. And so what I wanted to ask, that was why I asked him. I was like, well, what's the impact on working people? And actually, his answer was interesting, and I think pretty significant.
There's a really important moment here that we need to understand, because over the last few months we've been talking about a new era when it comes to defence and security, particularly collective defence and security, and recognising that we are in a changing world going into a new era, and therefore we have to act and lead differently. We're at a similar point for trade and the economy. This is not just a short-term tactical exercise. It is the beginning of a new era.
What he was saying was that this is not just a passing wind. This is a rewiring of the global economy for good or ill, depending on your perspective, and that will have massive ramifications, and that just like he framed the defence spending changes or accelerating defence spending and moving away from overseas development budget as a new era of defence, the way he said the government would need to respond to tariffs was with a new sort of economic outlook. We've talked a lot about the spring statement and Rachel Reeves tinkering around to stick to the fiscal rules. And it might be in the coming months that all of that gets blown out of the water by this protectionism and the knock-on for global markets and the knock-on for the UK economy, which means that the government might have to tax more, it might have to spend less, it might have to borrow more. And that is all really unknown. So when he started talking about a new economic era, I felt it was the beginning of a conversation that we're going to have in this country now.
There's been a lot of discussion in Labour ranks as to the desirability of changing what was put in the manifesto by Keir and Rachel Reeves about the fiscal rules and about tax, and also about what Rachel said is, I've done a tax-raising budget and I'm not going to come again and ask for more tax, and I'm not going to do more borrowing because that would break the fiscal rules. And there's been two camps, really. Well, three camps. One camp, which is, I've never agreed with this anyway. Let's use this as an opportunity to actually go back on what we said in the manifesto. Another group says, well, circumstances have changed. We might have put that in the manifesto, but it's no longer practical, bearing in mind what is happening to our economy. Therefore, we should change our fiscal rules and change our stance on tax. And then there's another group which says, look, we put it in the manifesto. We made a huge thing about our fiscal rules. We've made a huge thing about having the stability on predictability of when the Chancellor says something, that's what actually happens. It would be mad for us to change it now, go back asking for more tax, ask for more borrowing, which will increase the amount we have to spend on paying interest rates. Therefore, we should stick with it. My my sense is that what Keir Starmer is doing is explaining the difficulty of the situation rather than pitch rolling to change it in order to change the stance. But we'll see.
But Harriet, do you not think, is this the beginning of Starmer and Reeves and the cabinet thinking, actually, maybe we have to move from camp 3 where nothing will change? And that's how she framed the spring statement, into column 2 or camp 2, which is actually the world has changed. She kept saying it herself, the world's changed. Well, it really is bloody changing now, isn't it? And they move into camp 2. I mean,
Well,
that's what I think's going on. Do you agree?
Well, my suspicion is that's not what's going on. That it's about explaining it rather than uh, paving the way to changing it. And I actually think that for the advantages you get from changing the fiscal rules, the disadvantage in terms of a massive U-turn by the Chancellor. I know it can be justified by the circumstances have changed, but it's such a huge thing to break your manifesto promises. A lot of people say everybody already thinks we've broken our manifesto promises. They already think, because we put national insurance on employers, that we've broken our manifesto commitment. But the truth is we haven't. And there is something very much at the core of politics is keeping people with you, and also working out that moving from camp 3 to camp 2 doesn't actually solve the problem economically necessarily, but will give you a political problem.
We've talked about the kind of big idea about the new era and what that might mean, and that is unclear. But what is clear is that they do need to have a response. And the Prime Minister is keeping all options on the table. He clearly wants to get that economic deal, but they have announced this week that they are now going to formally consult business on what the fallout of retaliatory tariffs might be. And they're looking at potentially thousands of different tariffs on products. I did get the impression when I asked him about this, like, how long are you going to wait before you actually press the button on retaliatory tariffs? He was very much like, this is just a formal process that we would go through, rather than saber rattling on it, which to me went back to the point that what he was really trying to message to the US is, I am looking at this because I need to have all my options on the table, but I really would like to keep the sword in the sheath. If Trump does not give way to Starmer and give him some sort of economic deal, he will be under massive political pressure, because that's kind of the whole uh, that's the whole kind of hand on which he's played this so far.
My betting is that we are going to stick with the fiscal rules, and we're going to stick with what Rachel Reeves said, and we're going to stick with Rachel as Chancellor. Again, there's been more discussion about whether or not he should change policy and therefore change Chancellor. I mean, then we'd be back to where the Tories were, which is something happens, you blow off course, you switch the people around, nobody knows what's going on. So
Harriet, you are such a pro. You've done it again, because you know that just at the point at which we're going to an ad break, you slip in that knife saying, because the Tories are a bunch of rubbish idiots. And you're so good at it. We are back, and we wanted to talk about the TV show Adolescence. It has been out a few weeks, we know that, but it's really hit UK politics this week with the PM meeting its creators, its co-writers, and also Kemi Badenoch saying that she's too busy and doesn't have time to actually sit down and watch it.
She sort of said, I'm too busy to watch television, and I really think people shouldn't be talking about it. They should be making policy. And I just thought, you've totally misread the room there. Um, you know, the people are talking about it. It has really lit a touch paper for a public discussion debate. It has enabled parents worried about what their kids are doing on social media, and I have myself have 2 teenagers. It has opened up a discussion. It is a moment where drama meets life and allows for a public conversation. And I just thought, and actually, you're talking about having a phone ban um, in schools. because you are worried about what kids are consuming on social media, and you are worried about the way in which there's contagion, and you are worried about the pollution of their minds around social media and what they're doing online. So to then sort of say, but the dramatization, I don't really think that counts. I just thought it was politically like the antennae were not there. It's a kind of slight disconnectedness that I just don't think it's a politically smart thing to do.
This is exactly public policy, because there are some things you can do as an individual parent, and obviously parents do strive to bring up their children and take responsibility. But there are some things where you need public policy to back you up. And there's a generational divide on this. There's a limit to what parents can do in relation to their children's use of their smartphones, because the fact is that most in the parents' generation, they're not actually up to speed with what is going on
Yeah.
online with their children's generation. And also it's very difficult to withstand the pressure of the peer group pressure. If other parents are not imposing restrictions, it's very difficult for one parent to stand out. So this is almost like a public health thing where you've got to have herd immunity.
Yeah.
We've got to protect all children because individual parents can't. And it is something that parents are worried about. And it is going to be a big challenge for Keir Starmer, who had the makers of this TV programme into Number 10 to talk about it, and thereafter said, I want it to be shown in all schools. But the question in my mind, two questions were raised. Firstly, is after they've watched it, what is going to be the discussion afterwards? And secondly, is he going to act to stop the tech companies allowing this sort of stuff to go online into smartphones without protection of children? Because if the tech companies wanted to do this, they could actually protect children. They can do everything they want with their tech, and they're just choosing not to. So there are very big public policy challenges. Is he going to side with parents who are terrified and want this content off their children's phones? Or is he going to accept the tech bros' resistance to having to make changes to what they put
It
online?
terrifies as me because, like, my son is 6. You know, he clearly, I'm in a same-sex relationship with my partner Jen, so he clearly doesn't have a father figure there. We work incredibly hard to make sure he's got positive male role models in his life. You know, we also are going to work hard as he ages and as he starts getting into the stage where he's at having relationships with girls. I'm assuming girls, maybe boys, who knows, about how you treat women and how you treat women respectfully and how you do that in a loving context and all the rest of it. But it terrifies me. It terrifies me even before the sort of rise of this kind of open misogyny that is out there, the kind of Andrew Tate style.
Incel, involuntary celibates.
Before even the rise of all of that. I mean, even just the rise of being able to get so much hardcore pornography in your phone without really typing very much in. You could find it as easily as you like, and teenagers are curious. I mean, this idea of how you talk to young people about what sex is and what it should be, what relationships are and what you
Yeah.
should be. I kind of feel a little bit as well as if, and my party needs to take a lot of the blame for this in some ways, I think, in terms of the public narrative, is that it's really hard for schools too. And where the line is between what schools say
Yeah.
to people and what parents do and say and how they back them up. Because every year or so, there's some other public scandal, fear-mongering outcry that schools are talking about X with children that are too young about it. And actually, well, we are also asking schools to talk about sex and relationships and how they interact and all the rest of it. And yet there's always a public outcry that you might, I don't know,
Yeah.
mention gays, or you might mention that transgenderism exists, or you might mention all of these other things. And actually having open, honest conversations in the classroom, which are also backed up by families at home, is so important.
I think schools have got a lot on their plate, and I hate
Yeah.
to give the idea that they've got more duties, but I would like to see schools actually told top down from Westminster, you have got to ban the use of smartphones in school time, and that would then enable all schools not to have a discussion with their parents or to battle it out, but just to say this is the ruling.
So
We've got to ban smartphones, and then during school hours, and then that would be inspected by Ofsted as to whether or not they were actually doing that.
That is the Conservative policy. So you do actually agree with that? An
Yeah, I mean,
outright ban?
I think it's easier if you. I mean, I'm sensitive to the idea that we shouldn't constantly be telling schools what to do, and they've got a lot of common sense and a lot of professional experience, and they should have as much autonomy as possible. But perhaps it's easier for them if it's done top down, and then everybody has the same regime, and Ofsted inspect
Okay.
against it. So here, I think I'm with Kemi last week. I'm not with Kemi version this week. I'm in Kemi's version last week, which is, I think, what parents want is for schools to do a simple rule and for all schools to do the same simple rule, and for the tech companies to be told, you have got to sort out this issue of the content that's on children's phones. Parliament is an ancient institution, and we've got a new phenomenon, but actually Parliament could change its processes to be able to legislate in real time. And I think it's got to do that, including delegating this stuff to a powerful select committee, because otherwise we talk about it and then we're not able to legislate for 10 years, by which time that problem has really set in and we've got a whole load more problems.
The only thing I would like to say is that what both of you said that really resonated with me as a parent. I did watch Adolescence, and what I found really helpful was it's really hard with teenagers to talk about nudie selfies and talk about incels and talk about sex and talk about these things. Like, you can all remember when your parents tried to talk to you about that, you were like,
Oh,
I
it was
really want
hideous.
to die.
Oh, I wanted
Please,
to die.
please desist, right? But actually, what's brilliant about something like Adolescence and why it is worth, I think, watching it, and if you feel your kids are mature enough to watch it with them, is it allows you to open up a conversation where you can say to your child, this is a reason why when I say to you, never send a photo, there's a reason to that because these are the reasons. Or, when I say to you that that guy Andrew Tate is doing this and that, there's a reason for that. And then you can get into a discussion about incel or say, I don't know what it is. Can you explain it to me? And so actually drama opens pathways. Like when people used to all sit around the television for these national moments of watching EastEnders or Coronation Street, and these dramas offer an opportunity where there's a way in which you can have conversations that are otherwise quite difficult. And I don't think that should be downplayed. I think that is actually really important and it's really helpful. I found it, I'd like to say, I just found it, I cannot stop. I know it was massively hyped. I wasn't really looking forward to watching it, to be honest. I can't stop thinking about it. It's a really powerful dramatization. I think the question for Starmer, Harriet, is what you're saying, which is he's talked about it a lot. There is probably a benefit to maybe showing it more widely. I as a parent, I can see why he's making that argument about showing it to kids. But I do think that the government need to have more of a strategy because I think parents feel they need help and so do kids. Kids need to help as well to help them navigate this, as I call it, the wild west of social media, where we're kind of they're like a frontier generation, right?
And schools need help as well.
Yeah. That is all we have time for today. But remember, if you do have more time, we have a survey for you to fill out and tell us what you do and don't like about our podcast. Find it in the link in the show notes of this episode.
And do keep an eye out next week because we have got some fun news for you about something else that we're doing.
Yeah, we've got some very fun news. You're going to love it a lot. It's kind of like a game show in a way, isn't it? Going back to Trump. Anyway.
And we've got this great board. No, we don't. There's no boards. No boards.
No boards.
No boards.
But keep an eye out for that. And anyway, we've got to go. So goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.